What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the DK tank. Still one of the top, if not the top, tanking class in the game right now. They did see a little bit of a nerf with the change to Engulfing Flames. They are no longer able to provide the full 10% additional flame damage debuff, which isn't that big of a deal considering the stamina DPS meta, but it might take a little bit of a hit in trials like Asylum and Cloud Rest, where magic DPS are a little bit more common. But despite that nerf, DKs still bring a lot to the table that cannot really be discounted. So because of all the sort of things that DKs bring, things like increased survivability, additional block mitigation, good resource management, DK tanks are still going to be one of the best options in terms of actual classes to bring to trials. They bring the minor brutality for the stamina DPS. They also have a little bit of Engulfing Flames debuff. It's not quite 10% anymore, but they still bring some of that flame debuff with Engulfing Flames still, so they're still pretty solid option here despite all these changes that have been happening over the past few patches. So like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any gear in this video. That is reserved for a specific tanking gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner. So for those of you guys who are interested in what sets I am running or what sets you should be running as a tank, go ahead and pause this video, go ahead and check out that video. This video will still be here when you get back to go over skills as well as what sets DK tanks apart from other tanks and the general philosophy behind tanking in ESO. So let's go ahead and get started here. I did realize I need to change out one ability here. But for our front bar, we're going with the Ransack here for the minor protection. So this is assuming that we have a healer running Elemental Drain for the major breach, so you don't need to run Pierce Armor. But if you prefer running Pierce Armor, you can certainly go that route instead. But Ransack gives you the minor protection. It is the only way to get minor protection on a DK tank outside of running something like Temporal Guard or Ring of Preservation. So probably one of the cheapest, easiest ways to get this damage buff here, this resistance buff. There also talks that there will be combining Major Fracture and Major Breach in a future patch. So when that does happen, obviously Ransack will be the best option to go for. They will have to add in some sort of additional functionality to Pierce Armor to kind of make it worth running. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But for definitely choose Ransack if you have Ellie Drain already being provided in the group. Then we have Heroics. Sorry. Choking on my own spit here. Next we have Heroic Slash with Minor Maim and Minor Heroism. Two very important buffs and debuffs to have for the additional ultimate for Warhorns, and obviously some decrease in damage done from bosses. Next we have Fragmented Shield. You can go with the other morph if you'd prefer, which is Igneous Shield for the larger damage shield. Remember that damage shields do take into account resistances now, so you can pretty much think of the shield as an additional health. Just stack on some more health on top of it. So Igneous Shield is also a good option there. The main difference is the difference in the duration of Major Mending, which is not that big of a deal, so it's really up to you which morph you want to use. Then we have our self-heal, which is Green Dragon Blood. Very, very powerful self-heal, one of the stronger self-heals in the game, easily capable of propping you from 20% all the way up to 100% if you get the crit heal off of it. Next, we have Engulfing Flames. So right now, you can see here that we are sitting at about 6%. And this is actually built more towards getting higher spell damage. We are running, for example, the Apprentice Mundus to get higher spell damage. If you were to run something like the Atronach instead, obviously that number will go down to about 5% or so. But if you do end up, you usually will not be getting major sorcery. But if you do have your Warhorn up, you will be able to get about 6% debuff from Engulfing Flames. So that's kind of not terrible, not great either. Obviously, you're not hitting that maximum 10%, but it's still something if you don't have a Mag DK DPS or you don't have a DK healer able to provide an Engulfing Flames debuff. It's still a unique debuff, so it is still worth running even if you can't hit that 10%. If you're not running any magic DPS though, then obviously this skill is of no use to you, and so you can swap this out for some other ability instead. For our backbar, we have Inner Rage as a ranged taunt. We have Balance here for the major resolve for the physical and spell resistance bonus, as well as the Magicka regen bonus. Then we have Blockade of Frost, or Blockade of Lightning if you're running a lightning staff on the back bar for the enchant proc conditions. Then we have Unrelenting Grip and Choking Talons. These two are flex spots here. So Unrelenting Grip will allow you to pull enemies towards you. You cannot pull elite enemies, so anything with a fancy health bar, for those of you guys who are playing with the base bars there. So anything with a little bit of a fancy health bar, you won't be able to pull necessarily. But this is easily the best way to group enemies together. Much better than Silver Leash, which costs stamina. Unrelenting Grip costs magicka, so it's a lot easier to manage this. Then Choking Talons provides an AoE minor maim, so really great for large groups of adds. It also immobilizes enemies as well for 4 seconds, so acts as a CC. And it also provides an additional synergy here as well, so for your DPS to help basically kill enemies faster. It will not immobilize elite enemies, just like you can't pull elite enemies. You cannot hard CC certain elite enemies. So just keep that in mind. It will still apply the minor maim to them though. But again, these two are flex spots in boss fights, so these two will be used for trash fights to pull things together, CC them, let your DPS be able to kill everything in a giant ball. But for a trash fight or for boss fights, you will be swapping these two abilities out. And obviously we have Aggressive Warhorn for the major force. Now in terms of other abilities that you're going to want to have on hand here. Under the Ardent Flame line, you could run Cauterize, which acts as a burst heal. It's not that great. You can see here that Cauterize only heals for 3488, so not a really strong heal. It's something to consider running, but there are better ways to provide heals to the group outside of Cauterize. Under the Draconic Power line, all these abilities have their places, some of them in niche use scenarios. So if you don't want to run Balance, you could run Volatile Armor or Hardened Armor instead for your Major Resolve. Both of these have different use cases. So Hardened Armor will give you a bit of a damage shield, which is a little bit useful. Not all that great. It's not a very strong damage shield, but still useful nonetheless. Volatile Armor just gives you a little bit more DPS, so just deals additional magic damage over 10 seconds to anybody around you. So it's really up to you which ones you want to go for. I've already talked about Choking Talons for their minor main. Use Dragon Blood for your self heal. Make sure to use Green Dragon Blood and not Coagulating Blood. Coagulating Blood is weaker overall. Then we have Dragonfire Scale or Protective Plate. Both of them are very good options. They both reduce damage from projectiles by 50% for 6 seconds. Protective Plate gives you immunity to snares and mobilizations. Dragonfire Scale basically launches a fire orb back to deal a little bit more damage. So Dragonfire Scale will give you a little bit more DPS. Really great in places like Black Rose Prison, for example, where you have a lot of projectiles coming in. Just helps kill things faster. Even a little bit of DPS is better than no DPS provided. Protective Plate, on the other hand, that immunity to snares and mobilizations is really, really important. And if you do sort of do PvP on the side, Protective Plate is usually the better option to go for rather than Dragonfire Scale. And finally, Deep Breath for an AoE interrupt. So if you do need to interrupt multiple things at a time, then Deep Breath will be the best option to go for. It also does heal you a little bit as well. So 2,000 healing done, roughly speaking, for every enemy you manage to hit. So for trash fights, if you need to get a good heal, you can use Deep Breath or Draw Essence for the heal. It does cost quite a bit of magicka, so you can't really sustain it, but it is something to take into consideration. Under the Earth and Heart line, you could run either morph of Molten Weapons, so Molten Armaments or Igneous Weapons for the Major Brutality, Major Sorcery. Usually your DPS will be getting these from potions, Weapon Power Potions or Spell Power Potions, but by running Igneous Weapons or Molten Armaments, you open up the possibility of running something like a Minor Heroism Potion instead on DPS, basically allowing them to get more ultimates out, which could directly increase their DPS. That is kind of next level strategies though, and it's usually better off just to run your spell power weapon power potions, because those Minor Heroism potions I mentioned, they're really expensive to run in trials. Cinderstorm is another potentially good heal to run, not just for yourself but potentially for other groups if you're running something like Symphony of Blades, which procs off of heals. Pretty decent heal actually. It's 1100 healing done per second, so pretty nice. It is expensive, but it does last for a long period of time, 18 seconds, so it is justified in running Cinderstorm. I very commonly run Cinderstorm as a heal, just for myself, but for also to help proc Symphony of Blades as well. And then we have Magma Shell, which is really powerful. You can do either Magma Shell or Corrosive Armor, but most tanks will run Magma Shell for the additional shield that provides to nearby allies. This is basically your get out of jail free card. It reduces all incoming damage to 3% of your max health. So basically to kill you in 1 second, you need to take 34 hits in a second, which, while possible, is very difficult to do so in ESO. So this basically makes you more or less invulnerable for the entire duration of the ultimate. So for a full 12 seconds, you can just basically say, hey, screw you, I'm just going to take 3% of my max health as damage. So really, really great ability here, especially for progressing stuff, to just kind of be able to pop Magma Shell and just be like, hey, I'm going to take no damage for a little bit. It does mean you're giving up Warhorn, but sometimes keeping yourself alive is more important. Under the one-handed shield line, defensive posture, either morph, absorb missile, and defensive stance both have their use cases. Absorb missile for a self-heal for any sort of projectile that hits you, and defensive stance to reflect any projectiles back. It only reflects one, but it is still pretty useful to have there. Defensive stance also provides some additional block mitigation as well as a reduction to the cost of blocking, so that's always useful to have just if you don't have anything else to run. If you are running a bow backbar, you're going to want to run Endless Hail here to help proc your enchants. Also, if you are running a bow backbar, you might want to pick up Venom Arrow as a ranged interrupt. For Destruction Staff, that equivalent would be Crushing Shock as a ranged interrupt, so a little bit of a few options there. Also, under Destruction Staff line, Elemental Drain. So sometimes you will be asked to run Elemental Drain, perhaps healers need to run certain abilities. So this provides that Major Breach as well as the Minor Magic of Steel. So if you're running Ransack and both of your healers can't run Ellie Drain, you might need to run Ellie Drain if you have a Destro Staff backbar. For armor, the heavy armor morphs here, Immovable and Unstoppable Brute, are both potentially useful in their niche scenarios. So they both give you the Major Resolve, so your physical spell resistance buff. It also gives you immunity to knockback and disabling effects for 6 seconds. It does reduce your movement speed though. So with 5 heavy armor, if you're going 5 heavy, 1 medium, 1 light, it does reduce you down 10% of your overall movement speed. With all heavy armor, 7 heavy armor, you're reduced down to no movement speed whatsoever. You can only move by dodge rolling. Just keep that in mind if you do end up using either of these two morphs here. But the immunity to knockback and disabling effects can be useful in certain scenarios. Under the Fighter's Guild line, Ringer Preservation is one potential ability you want to have on hand here for the minor protection to the group, as well as the small heal that it provides. Great for places where you're going to be stacking up for larger damage that's going to be incoming. So for example, a hard mode, a Lachesty's hard mode, would be instances where you might want to run Ringer Preservation. Under the Psijic Order line, keep in mind, if you have access to the Psijic Order line, you do have Introspection and Deep Thoughts, as well as Temporal Guard under the ultimate. So Deep Thoughts and Introspection can replace Balance if you have another source of Major Resolve. This gives you health, magicka, and stamina back every second while you are channeling it. So do keep in mind it is a channeled, so you will not be able to block while you are channeling this ability. And it also can knock you out of the channel if you are pushed for whatever reason. So, to help mitigate this, you can get the Deliberation passive, which gives you major protection, but this is not as much as just straight up blocking would provide. So just keep that in mind. If you do run this, you will end up taking more damage while you are channeling this ability, compared to just straight up blocking and running something like Balance and using Fragmented Shield or Igneous Shield to get your stamina back. Then Temporal Guard is the ultimate, which provides minor protection while you have it slotted. So it just helps out, a nice passive way to get minor protection if you don't want to run Ransack. Make sure to have all these Undaunted skills unlocked. So you have an Overflowing Altar for the Minor Lifesteal and Blood Feast synergy. You have Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy. Not as strong as it used to be, but still helps provide Major Slayer for people running Lachesty's. Obviously, Inner Rage for your range taunt. Bone Surge for the Major Vitality buff from the Spinal Surge synergy. Very useful in certain fights where you want to get some additional healing received buffs. For example, Cloud Rest to help combat Baneful Mark. Then Energy Orb as a way to proc sets like Symphony of Blades, as well as to provide some additional combustion. With the fact that you only need to put out one orb at a time now, this really does make Energy Orb a viable skill to use on a tank. So you'll see in some of my tanking videos that I do use Energy Orb to help proc Symphony of Blades, as well as just to help provide some additional synergies for the Kestis users, and obviously the resources from the Combustion synergy. Finally, under the Alliance War line, Echoing Vigor as a heal to help procs Symphony of Blades again, as well as a self-heal. You can also run Resolve Vigor if all you want is just a self-heal. And then under the support line, you have Efficient Purge here to help cleanse negative effects off of you. So DKs, this is the only way to purge things off of yourself and other people. So just make sure to have this in the back of your pocket for those fights where you do need to purge things. And obviously Reviving Barrier as a nice shield. The heal is also nice, but primarily you'll be running this for the additional magic regen that you'd be getting from Magicka Aid here. So that's really why you're running Reviving Barrier. You can always replace this with something like Magma Shell or Temporal Guard instead. So that pretty much covers all of these skills. So in summary, for your front bar, these first 4 abilities are what I would call you must have. So either Ransack or Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Fragmented Shield or Igneous Shield, and Green Dragon Blood. This ability here, Engulfing Flames, is a bit of a flex spot, so you can swap this out with whatever ability you need. Then obviously Ultimate, you can swap this out for Magma Shell or Temporal Guard as needed. Or even Warhorn. And then on the back bar, Inner Rage, Balance, or any source of major resolve. And then either Blockade or Endless Hail, depending on what weapon you have on your back bar. And then these 2 abilities are flex spots. So you have 1 flex spot on the front bar, 2 flex spots on the back bar. Then Warhorn. You can have this on the front bar, so you can kind of play around with ultimates, however you want to set those up for yourself. Now, onto the philosophy behind tanking, how DK tanks differ from other tanks. So DK tanks mainly differ from the fact that they provide Minor Brutality, they're the only source of Minor Brutality in the game, and the only source of the Engulfing Flames debuff, which is a unique debuff. So they provide benefits to both Stamina DPS and Magicka DPS. So the Minor Brutality increases weapon damage, the Engulfing Flames increases flame damage for all of your Magicka DPS. And along with that, DKs do have a source of Major Mending, an on-demand Major Mending, which is pretty unique among tanks in the game. The only other tank that can possibly get it outside of sets and things like that would be Warden tanks, but that has a bit of a limitation. You need to heal somebody under a certain health threshold, versus DK tanks where you just pop your shield and you have Major Mending. So in terms of self-heals, DK tanks pretty much take the cake here. You pop let's say you pop an Igneous Shield, you pop a Green Dragon Blood, that's a lot of healing done in a given span of time. So definitely something that DK tanks excel at is that self-heal because they had that Major Mending applied. On top of that, they also have a get out of jail free card with Magma Shell. Just pop it and you're pretty much invincible for 12 seconds. So really nice for tanks that are just learning content, just gives them a little bit of some flexibility there. You would be giving up to the Warhorn, so you would be giving up group DPS, but sometimes just keeping yourself alive is way more important than providing some additional group DPS. So DK tanks, as a result of all this, are still one of the top tanks in the game, if not the top tank in the game. You definitely want to have a DK in group to get that minor brutality in this stam heavy meta. And while Mag DKs will be able to get a 10% additional flame damage debuff, they will not necessarily be pulling very good DPS. So sometimes you just want to, bite your losses and just take that 6% debuff rather than a 10% debuff from Mag DK or DK healer instead. So DK tanks, definitely top tier tank in Dragonhold still. Now, in terms of the actual how you want to tank, for those of you guys who are coming over from other MMOs, tanking at its core is still pretty much the same. The concepts are still exactly the same. You want to taunt enemies, keep aggro, and make sure to stay alive. One of the differences between other MMOs that I've commonly seen is that you don't have an AoE taunt. So part of your job as a tank is to be able to gather enemies together and hearts you see them to help DPS burn them down. So that's where chains and talons comes into play here to help pull things together and CC them. So that is one change that you will have to get used to coming from other MMOs. Besides from that, though, the secondary job of tanks is to provide buffs and debuffs. So that comes from things like sets, Yolnakreen, Alkosh, as well as abilities. So things like Aggressive Warhorn for the Major Force buff, Engulfing Flames, and obviously Igneous Shield for the Minor Brutality buff. So the difference between a good tank and a great tank is that difference in buff and debuff uptimes. A great tank will be able to maintain 100% uptime on Alkosh, 100% uptime on Minor Courage from Yolnakreen, 100% uptime on Engulfing Flames, and 100% uptime on Minor Brutality, things like that. While, yes, you do obviously want to make sure to stay alive, make sure to taunt things, make sure to be a good tank, separating out the good from the bad tanks really does boil down to buffs and debuffs in endgame trials. So that's what people are looking for when you are tanking in endgame trials, is just how well you're able to manage buffs and debuffs. So on my Twitch channel as well as on my YouTube channel, I do have POVs of tanks in various trials. You will need to go back quite a bit to get some older trials, but I am a tank main and I usually play on a DK tank when I'm tanking. So definitely check out those videos if you guys want to get a sense of how I approach tanking in various trials, as well as just to kind of pick up differences in tanking styles if you compare things to other content creators like Nephis, for example. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.